Death Valley covers close to 3,000 square miles of salt-flat, dry mountain range and canyon straddling California and Nevada. Most people who visit see the dunes, the visitor center, maybe Badwater Basin, at 282 feet below sea level. They miss what's scattered through the canyons above it. A mining camp where a mob lynched a man from a telephone pole, then dug him back up and hanged him a second time because the photographers arrived too late for the first one. A boomtown founded by stagecoach robbers, so lawless that Wells Fargo refused it a branch office, where the silver left town cast into 450-pound cannonballs, too heavy for a single horseman to steal. A ghost town sold to investors on posters showing steamboats sailing up a river that ran dry most of the year and passed nowhere near it. And a mountaintop silver camp, once one of the most violent boomtowns in American history, that a young entrepreneur bought in 2018 and is now rebuilding in real time in front of millions of YouTube subscribers. Stick around for number 1, because it might be the strangest story in this entire valley. A ballerina from New York, a flat tire, and 45 years spent dancing for an audience she painted onto the walls with her own hands. This is where we dig up the history these towns left behind. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because we post deep dives like this every week. Today we're counting down 10 of the strangest, most forgotten places in and around Death Valley. Number 10, Chloride City, the town that never quite existed. According to local mining lore, a prospector named A.J. Franklin found the ore that started this place in 1871 by picking up a rock to kill a rattlesnake. The rock turned out to be laced with silver chloride. The find was real. The location was almost comically impractical. The nearest actual town was roughly 180 miles away, across salt flats and mountains with no roads in between, which meant decades of only sporadic digging by a handful of stubborn prospectors. It took the much bigger 1904 gold rush in nearby Rhyolite to finally pull enough people back into the district to justify laying out a real town site in 1905. Even then, Chloride City never became a city. It stayed a loose scatter of tents, an assay office, and mine workings tucked into a windswept saddle in the Funeral Mountains, with views stretching down into Death Valley and across to the Panamint Range. The only person definitively linked to the site by name is buried there. Locals call the grave the Tomb of the Unknown Miner, because nothing about James McKay survives except the fact of his being there. Today, the site is reached by a rough 17-mile dirt road that climbs steadily into the mountains and is only reliably passable certain months of the year. 3 ruined stamp mills, some scattered cabin foundations, mine dumps and adits, and 1 nameless grave. That's the whole town. Whined through rusted equipment is the only sound left to hear it. Number 9, Darwin, the ghost town that refuses to finish dying. 11 miles west of Death Valley National Park sits a town that was once the largest in Inyo County. Silver and lead were struck in the surrounding hills in the early 1870s, and Darwin boomed almost overnight into saloons, gunslingers, and by 1877, a population of roughly 3,500. There has never been a church in Darwin, which tells you something about the priorities of the place. At least 30 confirmed shootings and knife fights are on record from those years. Then, in 1878, smallpox tore through the town, and a suspected arson fire the following year burned 14 more businesses to the ground. What kept Darwin from vanishing entirely wasn't tourism. It was remoteness. No cell service, no grocery store, no one watching, which is exactly what started drawing a small population of artists in the 1970s. Sculptor Gordon Newell moved out from Monterey with his son Hal, and his granite work also frames the White House ellipse in Washington, D.C. His work sits today alongside cast marble sculptures from resident artist Jim Hunolt, scattered through a town of Joshua trees and free-roaming wild burros. Here's the detail that sums up the whole place. Somewhere in this town of fewer than 40 residents sits a geodesic dome with a hand-painted sign reading Institute of Geophysics and Planetary Physics System-Wide Offices. Nobody there studies geophysics. It's a private joke the artists built for themselves, in a town most people will never drive through. The 2020 census counted 36 people, down from 43 a decade earlier. A one-time mining capital, now smaller than most high school classrooms, still quietly hanging on. Number 8. Keeler, the town Los Angeles killed. This one didn't die from a mine closing or a fire. It died because a city 200 miles south needed water more than it needed to leave Keeler alone. The town started as a steamship port on Owens Lake, moving silver bullion down from the Cerro Gordo mines by boat, and by 1883, the Carson and Colorado narrow-gauge railroad had made Keeler its southern terminus. At its peak, somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 people lived there, complete with an Olympic-sized public pool called the Keeler Beach and Swim Club, built during a 1920s resort-era revival. Then, in 1913, the city of Los Angeles began diverting the Owens River into its own aqueduct. Owens Lake had no other water source. By around 1926, it was completely dry, and Keeler found itself stranded more than a mile from where the shoreline used to be. The exposed lake bed's fine mineral dust, whipped by the valley's brutal, constant winds, produced storms severe enough that residents reported it stripping paint off their cars. For years, that dry lake bed ranked among the largest single sources of dust pollution anywhere in the country. Some residents still live in boxcar houses, decommissioned railroad cars from the old Carson and Colorado line, converted into homes decades ago and never abandoned. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has since shallow flooded roughly 48 square miles of that lake bed under court order, which has, unexpectedly, created bird habitat where none existed for a century. About 60 to 70 people live in Keeler today. The lake never came back, and the wind still remembers it was there. Number 7. Leadfield, the town built on a lie. In February 1926, a promoter named C.C. Julian took over the Western Lead Mines Company in Titus Canyon and ran one of the more audacious advertising campaigns in American mining history. His posters showed steamboats sailing up the Amargosa River straight to Leadfield's front door. In reality, the river was dry most of the year and didn't run within 20 miles of the town. It didn't matter. In one 24-hour stretch in early 1926, roughly 40,000 shares of Western Lead Mines stock sold at $1.57 apiece. At the promotional launch event, guests were treated to an outdoor feast, a live 6-piece band imported from Los Angeles, and a keynote address from Nevada's lieutenant governor. Stock had tripled by March. The population hit around 300. A post office opened that August. Then, in late October 1926, the company's main tunnel finally broke through to where the rich vein was supposed to be, and found almost nothing. By February 1927, barely a year after the town was founded, the post office closed and the population evaporated as fast as it had arrived. Julian was later indicted in a separate oil industry fraud, fled the country, and died by suicide in 1934. The site was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1975, a strange kind of permanence for a town built on a lie. Here's the thing worth sitting with. There was real ore in that canyon, worked modestly as far back as 1905, just never enough to justify the 6-piece band, or the 40,000 shares sold before anyone had checked. Number 6. Ballarat, the ghost town that outlived its last killer. Ballarat was founded in 1897 as a plain, practical supply post for miners, named after Ballarat, Australia, by the immigrant who platted the town site. At its peak, it had 400 to 500 residents, 7 saloons, 3 hotels, a school, a jail, and a morgue. No churches, same as Darwin. By 1917, the Ratcliffe mine had shut down, and the post office closed with it, leaving the town to a handful of holdouts, including a prospector named Charles Fergie, better known as Seldom Seen Slim, who made Ballarat his home until his death in 1968, and claimed he hadn't bathed properly in 20 years, splashing water on himself outdoors instead. The town's real infamy came decades later, and it had nothing to do with mining. In 1968 and 1969, Charles Manson and his followers moved into Barker Ranch just south of town, using Ballarat as their last link to the outside world. In October 1969, police raided the ranch and arrested Manson, hiding under a bathroom sink. Ballarat was the last place he was ever a free man. Barker Ranch itself, later burned down in a suspicious fire in 2009. A rusting green 1942 Dodge Power Wagon still sits parked in town today, linked to the family's escape attempts, though accounts genuinely disagree on whose truck it actually was, whether it belonged to Tex Watson, another family member entirely, or was moved there afterward by the ranch's owner. Seldom Seen Slim wrote his own epitaph before he died. It's carved into his tombstone in the town's small Boot Hill Cemetery. Me lonely? Hell no. I'm half coyote and half wild burro. What's left is a handful of adobe ruins, an irregularly staffed trading post, that cemetery, and a truck nobody can properly identify. The town's most infamous resident was never actually a resident there at all. If you're finding this interesting, drop a thumbs up and let us know in the comments which of these towns you'd actually want to drive out and stand in yourself. We read every one. We're only halfway through this list, and it gets considerably darker from here. Number 5. Skidoo, the man who was hanged twice. In April 1908, a saloon keeper named Joe Hooch Simpson shot and killed James Arnold, one of the town's founding and best-liked figures, inside Arnold's own store. Law officers managed to hold off an immediate lynching, but only briefly. A mob soon dragged Simpson from custody and hanged him from a telephone pole. Here's the wild part. Newspaper photographers arrived too late to catch the actual hanging. So, according to accounts that get repeated in nearly every retelling of this story, the mob dug Simpson's body back up and strung him up a second time, purely so the cameras could get their shot. Decades later, an elderly man who admitted he'd pulled the rope told a magazine writer that Simpson had actually died of a heart attack from fright, before the rope ever properly tightened. None of that was really about Skidoo's mining operation, which was, by the standards of Death Valley boomtowns, unusually well run. The town was founded in 1906, after two prospectors got lost in fog, en route to another strike, and stumbled onto gold-bearing ledges instead. The Skidoo mine went on to produce roughly 75,000 ounces of gold, worth more than $1.5 million at the time, and the mill ran almost entirely on water piped, more than 20 miles from a spring near Telescope Peak, a pipeline distance some locals believe is where the town's odd name actually came from. When the sheriff finally arrived from Independence to investigate the lynching, after a rough journey through Tonopah and Rhyolite, he reportedly said the killing had saved the county $25,000 in trial costs. Nobody was ever prosecuted. Almost nothing of the town survives now, except the 15-stamp mill, still standing, and the visible scar of that old pipeline route across the hillside. Everything else out there is just open desert. The mob got its second photograph. The county saved its money. Nobody remembers what happened to the telephone pole. Number 4. Panamint City, the outlaw town the sky erased. In 1872, 3 prospectors searching for a lost mine were followed into Surprise Canyon by 6 stagecoach bandits, wanted for a $12,000 Wells Fargo robbery. The 2 groups were forced into an uneasy partnership over the silver the prospectors had found underneath them. Word eventually reached Nevada Senator John P. Jones, who, together with fellow Senator William Stewart, poured serious investment into the district and built it, within 2 years, into a boomtown of roughly 2,000 people, complete with a mile-long main street and a red light district. Wells Fargo refused to open a branch there. The reputation was that bad, and the company had a policy about it. The senators solved their robbery problem with a genuinely clever piece of engineering. They cast their silver into ingots weighing around 450 pounds apiece, too heavy for any single mounted robber to make off with, then hauled them out on unguarded wagons. When one of the original outlaws complained to Senator Stewart that this wasn't a fair way to treat a would-be thief, Stewart reportedly told him, "You don't expect me to feel sorry for you, do you?" Nature did, eventually, what the bandits never could. On July 24, 1876, a flash flood roared down Surprise Canyon and washed away most of the town in a matter of hours. Mining continued sporadically for over a century afterward, but a second catastrophic flood in 1983 scoured the access road down to bedrock, permanently stranding whatever vehicles were still parked up there. Today, the only way in is a strenuous 7.5-mile hike, gaining more than 3,600 feet, scrambling over boulders and through overgrown brush, passing those same rusted vehicles exactly where the floods left them decades ago. The district's total production is estimated around $2.5 million. The smelter's brick chimney is the tallest thing left standing, visible from a long way off in a canyon that, unusually for this part of the desert, still has a running stream through its narrows. A town too lawless for Wells Fargo, too clever for horseback robbers, and no match at all for one afternoon of rain. Number 3. Cerro Gordo. California's bloodiest boomtown is being rebuilt on YouTube. Multiple historical accounts describe Cerro Gordo as one of the most violent boomtowns in American history. Frequent gunfights, no schools, no churches, just a silver camp perched at 8,500 feet that helped bankroll the early growth of Los Angeles. Silver was discovered near Buena Vista Peak in 1865 by Pablo Flores and a group of Mexican miners, and by the late 1860s, the town was California's largest silver producer, with a population approaching 5,000. The district is believed to have produced roughly $500 million worth of silver, adjusted for inflation. Then the easy ore ran out. The town emptied through a slow decline into zinc mining, and finally nothing, and for decades, a caretaker family kept the site in what preservationists call arrested decay. In June 2018, entrepreneur Brent Underwood and business partner John Beer bought the entire ghost town for $1.4 million. Underwood moved in full-time in March 2020, right as the pandemic began, documenting his isolated restoration project on a YouTube channel called Ghost Town Living, reached via an 8-mile dirt road so steep and sharp-edged it can puncture a standard tire without much effort. Here's the detail that stops people cold. On June 15, 2020, exactly 149 years to the day after the historic American Hotel first opened its doors in 1871, a suspected electrical fire burned the hotel to the ground, along with the Crapo House and the Old Ice House. Underwood has spent years since rebuilding it using historically accurate methods, filming the entire process for an audience that has since grown into the millions, and his book about the experience became a New York Times bestseller. About 20 structures survive today from an original roughly 400, including the 1868 Belshaw House, and something like 30 miles of mine tunnels still run beneath the site, mostly unmapped even now. A town that nearly killed itself with violence in the 1870s, and then, on the exact anniversary of its own hotel's opening, tried to burn itself down one more time. Number 2. Rhyolite, the city of golden dreams that died in a decade. In 1904, prospectors Frank Shorty Harris and Ed Cross found gold-bearing rock in the Bullfrog Hills. Within about a year, a 2-tent camp had exploded into a town site with thousands of residents. What set Rhyolite apart from a dozen other Death Valley area strikes was outside money. Steel magnate Charles Schwab bought the district's biggest mine in 1906 and poured serious capital into real infrastructure. By 1907, Rhyolite had electric lights, piped water, telephones, a hospital, a school, an opera house, and its own stock exchange. 3 separate railroads served the town, and it counted 20 saloons within its very first year. None of it was built to last. The economy ran as much on speculative investment as on actual ore pulled out of the ground, and the nationwide financial panic of 1907 pulled the whole thing apart at the seams. The Montgomery Shoshone mine shut down for good in March 1911. By the 1920 census, the population had cratered to just 14. Here's a detail worth remembering. One of Rhyolite's original saloon bar tops was moved to another town in 1913 and, according to reports, is reportedly still in use today, more than a century later, at the Pioneer Saloon in Good Springs, Nevada. And because timber was scarce in that stretch of desert, a 76-year-old Australian miner named Tom Kelly built an entire house out of roughly 50,000 discarded medicine, whiskey, and beer bottles on the simple logic that glass was cheaper out there than lumber. What's left today is genuinely striking. The 3-story Cook Bank building still stands as a hollowed-out ruin, one of the most photographed ghost town structures anywhere in the American West. Kelly's bottle house has been restored, and right beside the ruins sits the Goldwell Open Air Museum, a sculpture park built in 1984 that includes a ghostly, life-size recreation of the Last Supper, standing alone in open desert with nobody around to see it. A town that had a stock exchange and an opera house before it had a stable population, and lost both again within a single decade. Number 1. The Amargosa Opera House. The woman who danced for a painted audience in the middle of the desert. Walk into this theater today, and the first thing you notice is who's already sitting there. Rows of painted nobility fill the walls floor to ceiling. A king and queen holding court at the center. A bullfighting family off to one side. Monks, gypsies, musicians, all rendered in careful Renaissance detail. 2 cats sleep on painted velvet cushions tucked into the bottom corners. Every seat in this 16th century crowd is full, and not one of them is real. Look up and the ceiling holds 16 more painted women, playing antique instruments in a circle above the stage. Outside, there is nothing for miles in any direction. Just the flat, open Amargosa Desert Basin, straddling the line between California and Nevada, right at the edge of Death Valley National Park. The building itself started out as something far less strange. It was constructed between 1923 and 1925 as part of a Pacific Coast Borax Company town, complete with offices, a dormitory, and a 23-room hotel done up in Spanish colonial revival style. By the 1960s, the company town had died the way company towns tend to, and the old recreation hall, Corkhill Hall, sat abandoned with a leaking roof and warped floors. In March 1967, a touring New York ballerina named Marta Beckett had a flat tire nearby. While her husband dealt with the gas station across the street, she peeked through a hole in the hall's back door and saw a small stage under faded calico curtains. She later said, "The building seemed to speak to her, telling her to take it, to do something with it." She and her husband secured the lease within a day for $45 a month plus repairs and moved out from New York within the year. Her first performance was February 10, 1968. 12 people showed up. That same year, a torrential rainstorm flooded the theater, and as Beckett knelt to clear 16 inches of muddy water off the floor, she looked at the bare walls and decided to paint herself an audience instead of waiting around for a real one. It took 4 years to finish the walls, 2 more for the ceiling. Here's the detail that stays with people long after the video ends. For years, when literally nobody came to watch, Marta Beckett performed her full show anyway, dancing for the crowd she had painted onto the walls and ceiling with her own hands, cats included, in an empty theater in the middle of the desert. National Geographic found her in 1970, then Life magazine, and the world followed both of them out into the sand. She performed nearly every week after that, rain or shine, audience or no audience, until her final show on February 12, 2012, at age 84, every one of the theater's 113 seats full for the occasion. She died at her home next door to the theater on January 30, 2017, at 92. The murals are still there. The hotel next door still takes guests, plumbing troubles and all. Nobody has painted over her audience, and by every indication, nobody ever will. Death Valley isn't just heat and salt flats. It's fraud, violence, flash floods, an entire lake stolen out from under a town, and one woman who turned an abandoned social hall into a lifelong performance for an audience of her own making. For me, it's the Amargosa Opera House, a story about choosing to keep dancing, even when nobody's watching, in the middle of nowhere, for 45 years. That's the one that stays with you after the rest fade. Which of these 10 surprised you the most? And did we miss a place you think deserves to be on this list? Let us know below, and subscribe if you want more forgotten history like this every week.